Hello everyone, Lore Master of Sotek here, and we've got some cool stuff to talk about. So, I'm sure most of you have seen somewhere, either on YouTube or Twitter or whatever it is you prefer to use, that there's been another update for Warhammer the Old World. I didn't make a video on it immediately because I wanted some time to digest the announcement and also to kind of take a look at the community reaction, because there was some not great responses from many people, and I kind of want to address that. But first, let's talk about the actual announcement itself. So basically, the newest announcement was that we got a map update, which shows that they're going to be delving in really heavily to Kislev, and it looks like Norska as well. And basically what the announcement boils down to is that Kislev is going to be their own playable faction in Warhammer the Old World. And the big thing they wanted to show us is they do focus on talking about that Kislev is a very cavalry-centric faction, which is true. Back in the lore, they had many cav units in the lore, and in tabletop, they almost had purely cav units. And they centered very heavily around, and that's because, you know, Kislev is just like a big plain. It's like just this, it's not a waste, but it's just this open land that a lot of it spends most of the year with a lot of ice and snow and such. But Kislevites they're a very salt of the earth kind of people, and a lot of their ancient history was nomadic before they settled down, especially, and I'm talking like thousands and thousands of years ago. But really, I do want to say I'm super duper excited about this announcement. I'm going to hit that like button. I am really pleased that we are getting a focus on Kislev, and quite frankly, I think they're actually giving us a very strong hint that we're probably going to see playable Norscan dwarves, or at least a much more focused intent on them than we had in fantasy for many years. And that's just because they're outright being like, hey look, there are Norse dwarves here. If you've ever heard me talk about Norscan dwarves in 8th edition, or honestly 6th edition forwards to be more blunt, the Norse dwarves were always such a weird faction because Games Workshop was very inconsistent on whether they were dead or alive. Because if you read the Warriors of Chaos army books, including the 8th edition army book, it flat out says that the Norscan dwarves were completely wiped out by a Chaos Lord of one of the Norscan tribes. Whereas if you read the Dwarf 8th edition army book, it said that the Norscan dwarves were still alive and had played a notable role in getting to know Thorgrim, and they played a big role in securing Thorgrim Grudgebearer's claim to kingship as High King, and they even established a bond that basically he reconnected the Norscan dwarves with the World's Edge Mountain dwarves, and they had like a really solid relationship even to the modern day. So I'm hoping that this announcement, not only are we getting playable Kislev for the first time in, let's see, Kislev stopped being playable at the start of 7th edition, which means that Kislev has been roughly gone since roughly like 2005, 2004, so almost 20 years. So by the time this will probably come out, so really excited that Kislev is going to come back and be playable and is getting fully expanded upon, and that hopefully we'll see the Norscan dwarves as well. That being said, beyond that, they do show some concept art of the only new unit they're talking about right now, which are the Ice Guard. What are they called? The Ice Guard, which are essentially a all-woman contingent that are able to gently channel ice magic into their weapons, which we can see here. And they seem to be a very elite bodyguard unit, though they are capable of using bow and arrow. So it seems like they're probably going to be like, I don't know, something along the lines of Lothern Sea Guard, but probably a more elite version, obviously, seeing as they're a Tsarina's guard. Outside of that, I will say that I like the reveal very, very much. I do really enjoy the idea of a contingent that spends so much time around the Ice Queens that they have formed a bond with the power of ice magic. And I suspect it may have something to do with this really big gem at the center of this one's chest, or maybe even that circlet on this one's head. It may be that they carry some kind of locus of power that allows them to channel ice magic while not actually being wizards themselves. But of course, that remains to be seen. I am very curious if they're actually going to be just low-tier wizards that are just more focused on fighting than they are on actively casting, or if instead they're not wizards, but they are people who, due to being around the Ice Queens for as long as they have and being surrounded with so much ice magic, maybe they're given artifacts that allow them to have a small measure of control to wield these weapons, which I will say I love the designs. The weapons, they're very interesting. They kind of have a feel of, they feel very, I don't want to say barbaric, but they feel very, rural is not right. I don't know the word that I'm looking for, but there's kind of a ancient handmade quality to them. They don't look professionally made, I guess is what I'm trying to say. They almost look like they were created through ancient forms by hand by the wielders, instead of being really powerful weapons forged by masters, you know? This looks like it may be a shield, which if that's a shield, that's a very, very cool looking shield. I do like the designs very much. So, gosh, look at that. That arrow, you can see you have the arrowhead here, and it's just got that big ol' honking spock of ice coming off of it. It's great. Outside of that, now we can talk about some other things kind of revealed in this. So, one thing they did that's unfortunate is they didn't really give us any more hints about when this is taking place. You know, we see that they still have this hard border that was revealed on the first set of maps, which I still haven't quite figured out yet. And I know a lot of people have posited times when this might be happening. I've seen numerous videos of people claiming that the last set of maps, which I think I can see if I go here. Oh, no, maybe not here, but one of them. They were like, oh, it's the time of the Three Emperors, because there's all these different factions, but that can't be right. They can't say that based on that map, because it just doesn't support it. There is just there were too many factions, and B, all of the flags were not people involved. The only flag from the prior map they had these little faction flags. The only one that even lined up with the time of that civil war in the Empire was Magritta, who was in charge of Marienburg. But the flag only said Magritta, which I think the actual Magritta who ruled at the end of the time of the Three Emperors was like Magritta the 4th or Magritta the 7th, but she wasn't the first. And she also was a child during that. Like, she wasn't an active player in the time of the Three Emperors. She was literally just someone that Marienburg held up as an empress or one of the claimants to the throne, but she wasn't actually an active player. But the other names were completely wrong and didn't line up at all. I've heard some other people claim that, or at least in my chat, people have told me that some others have claimed that this is going to take place during the Mordheim crisis, which I find that difficult to believe. Mordheim seems like a very inappropriate time to focus the old world. If Games Workshop wanted to do something focused on Mordheim, I feel like it would make a lot more sense to just bring back Mordheim, not bring back the Warhammer Fantasy Universe / game and then do it about Mordheim. That just doesn't make sense to me. So I'm not a big fan of that claim either. Though I would admit I have had difficulty verifying if the names presented on the past map, where I think it's like Sigismund, Magritta, and then 2 others, are people from the Mordheim crisis, because unfortunately Mordheim was practically already retired by the time I started playing back in the early 2000s. But in any event, that's this reveal. So I do want to kind of put out a quick public message, though, about my thoughts or my concern with the community, because I know a lot of people in my community are people who potentially were involved in this, hence why I'm making this to just sort of address it. It's okay. Okay, first of all, there are two groups I need to address. The first is some people who seem to think they're the old guard of Warhammer Fantasy, which, if you're not familiar with that term, that used to be a really big term in Warhammer Fantasy back when it was around, was that there are sometimes people who really, really like the game in 5th edition, or 4th edition, or 3rd edition, or 6th edition, which, just as a reminder, there's usually 5 to 8 years between each edition. And so, like, that's a notable period of time. You know, the game, Warhammer Fantasy started, I believe, in 1985, and went all the way to 2012, 2013, somewhere in that ballpark. And so there's a lot of changes the game's been through over its life. You know, it was around for like 30 plus years. Or 30, almost 30 years. And there are a lot of people who kind of came out of the woodwork for this announcement and just like dumped on it. Like just shit all over it. And apparently the argument was that the Ice Guard don't make sense or like ruin the universe because they're not low fantasy, they're high fantasy, which, first of all, you're talking out of your ass. I'm sorry. Like, I get that there are a lot of people who, the reason we call them old guard, it's not a good thing to be an old guard. I should say that. If you're sitting there go, oh, I'm in the old guard, you don't want to be in the old guard. The old guard are basically people who get used to the game being one way, and then if it changes, or the lore moves forward, or they decide to retcon things so it makes more sense with the direction they're trying to take things, they get like super duper angry and turn into annoyed nerds who turn red in the face and are like spitting over everyone because they're so angry. Don't be that guy. Try and have an open mind and explore and read and expand your horizons before you try and make calls on things. And to anyone that's saying that this is high fantasy, I'm sorry, what? Like, have you read Warhammer Fantasy lore? I call myself the lore master for good reason, and I can easily say that the Tsar and Tsarinas of Kislev, especially the Ice Queens, having an elite bodyguard called the Ice Guard, who, due to their proximity to the Ice Queen, or potentially because of magical artifacts, have the ability to channel a little bit of ice, magical ice, onto their weapons to make them more deadly. That is not high fantasy. That is low fantasy. It's not that dramatic. They're not throwing their hands out to like throw a fan of knives or creating ice walls, or they're not like magical. They make sense in the context of Kislevite lore. Kislev is a naturally high magical nation. In the Ice Queens. The Ice Queens are very scary. They're very intimidating. A lot of Kislevites are afraid of them for good reason. There have been bad ones. There have been good ones. Ice magic in and of itself is a very controversial lore within the Warhammer Fantasy universe because virtually all of the casters of ice magic are women. There are no male ice wizards. And I think it has to do with a prophecy where if there is a male ice wizard, it's going to be like really bad. So either they don't happen, or if they do happen, I think they usually get killed. I can't remember exactly if it's just they don't happen at all, or that when they do, they die. But ice wizards are people who wield the power of the land of Kislev. And on top of that, Kislev has hags, like, especially among the Ungol's. They have a ton of hag mothers who have the ability to wield the power of spirits, and they have like their own lore, which is traditionally like the lore of spirits, and they have little things where they can like put curses on you or see the future in little ways and do all this cool stuff. So like they have wizards. They have if anything, I would say that Kislev is probably the most naturally magically inclined of the nations of men, compared to Bretonia, the Empire, Tilia, Estalia, and the Border Princes. Like, they're the only nation where the people there naturally developed a version of magic that they were able to control and teach themselves and carve themselves a position in society. You know, in Bretonia, magic was not okay until the Lady of the Lake took over. And then the Lady of the Lake basically sent the Fey Enchantress, who, according to the most canonical sources, although there is competing theories, but it seems most likely, I would say with 90% certainty, that Morgiana Le Fay is actually in reality an elf, not a human. She just doesn't really advertise it very much. And I'm not sure if it's that she pretends to die and therefore passes on the mantle to another Fey Enchantress, or maybe she actually dies in battle or something and then passes it on to another elf, or if it's sometimes it's been a human and sometimes it's been an elf. I don't know, because it's very confusingly written. But most sources point to her being an elf, who then takes human children that are magically gifted, and if they're boys, they get shunted off to Athel Loren to die, and if they're girls, they get taught by the Fey Enchantress until they're able to control their power and become damsels, and then they get sent back into Bretonia as agents of the Lady of the Lake. If you're in the Empire, they weren't allowed to wield magic at all until the Great War Against Chaos, when Magnus the Pious fought Asvar Kul, and he realized that mankind was going to get bodied if the Empire did not get on board with magic. Because if they couldn't learn how to control magic, then they could not learn how to counter the magic of chaos. Because when he was on those battlefields, he saw how bad the Chaos Sorcerers were curb stomping everybody, until Teclis and his lore masters ran out there and started fighting back and were able to overwhelm and defeat them. And he was like, oh, that's kind of a big fucking deal. So he begged Teclis to teach men how to learn and control magic, and that's how the Colleges of Magic got founded. Meanwhile, Estalia, Tilia, and the Border Princes don't have super well-established horns of magic. Everyone who's a wizard there is generally sent off to the Empire to learn magic, or they end up being necromancers or chaos sorcerers, except for very, very rare cases. So then you have Kislev, which has had the Ice Queens and Hag Mothers for generations. You know, they've been around forever, and nobody taught them that. They figured it out, which is so awesome and is such a unique flavor to them. Ice magic is not something you formally go to college to learn, or it's not something you're kidnapped by a fake elven goddess to learn. It's something that you either have to be taught by your ancestors, or you have to just learn to wield it through the land whispering to you and figure it out, or it's going to overwhelm and kill you. And I love that. So to me, it makes perfect sense that there would be a magically inclined bodyguard for the Ice Queens. I mean, even just thinking about Temple Guard, which I know seems like a segue, but Temple Guard spends so much time around the Slann that those like Chococks, who the Eternity Wardens, who spend time in the Eternity Chambers, they get so inundated with magical energy that they basically develop a tolerance to it. You know, they're able to kind of shrug it off, essentially, and wield magical artifacts that would really overwhelm most people with ease. That's why Chococks, when he fights in battle, he is really dangerous, because he can just deal with magic and wield magical artifacts that allow everyone else around him to become really sluggish and slow. Meanwhile, Chococks like bursts into motion, just runs everybody over. It seems like he's moving super, he's like Sonic the Hedgehog fast looking, but in reality, he's just ignoring the effects of the Eternity Key he wears. So I just wanted to get it out there, at least from my perspective, which granted, it's an opinion. If you're someone that looks at this and you go, that seems a little much, it's really not. I would really encourage you to educate yourself on Kislev's history and Kislev's culture with magic before looking at this and thinking, oh, that's high fantasy. No, it's not. the only thing, Kislev is like one of the least high fantasy things. It's dark, low fantasy. Magic has an impact, and to me, what I define as low fantasy is that magic has an impact on the Warhammer world, but it's unstable, dangerous, and minor. Like, a lot of people can't use magic, or those who do so in very small doses because it's a fundamentally dangerous power to wield. You know, this isn't Age of Sigmar where we have people turning into lightning men or creating giant gear fortresses that can fly through the sky, or chronomatic cannons, or which are all things that actually have happened, and you know, all this super crazy stuff. I consider Age of Sigmar to be high fantasy, where like it's so out of the realm of reality that they don't bother explaining anything. There's no like hard fast rules of this is how magic works, because in Age of Sigmar that'd be stupid because they constantly are breaking it. So to me, it's high fantasy because their magic doesn't have defined rules, and it seems like it can do literally anything. Warhammer Fantasy, that's not the case. There are rules. Magic is dangerous, you know, and I really like that we're exploring Kislev's relationship with it, because to them it is really important. Without the Ice Queen and that ancient power that naturally has to do with their bond with the land, which you can actually read a really good focus on in the End Times novel. I think it's Blood and Ice, or it's right here with Ice and Sword, which is an End Times novel about what happens to the Tsarina and like the last fighters of Kislev during the End Times. Actually, I think it's Ice and Sword, but it's a really good short story that really does a beautiful job of explaining exactly what ice magic is. And actually allows us to see the Tsarina Katerin before her demise, which I really appreciated. She's a character we just didn't get to see enough of in 7th and 8th edition. Even in 6th edition, we didn't really get to see her that much. That being said, my biggest worry still is that this is going to take place sometime so far in the past that there might be factions who are not around that everybody really wants to see. Because the problem with not starting in, like, the 2500s or the 2400s at least, is that you're gonna start running... Like, a lot of the realms, a lot of the factions that people really love haven't necessarily been around that long. Like, Bretonnia is not that old. Bretonnia has not been around for a super long time, if they start going back hundreds or thousands of years. So, I'm really hoping that when they say we're bringing back Warhammer Fantasy, they're bringing back the fantasy that people want to play, and that actually has the characters that everybody knows and loves, instead of going back like hundreds or thousands of years to times where we don't know anybody. And it's just, I just really hope they don't do that. You know, unless they were going back to something like the Great War Against Chaos, I could see that being kind of fun. But I just hope that all the original 15 factions are going to at least be involved. But in any event, the other group that I actually wanted to quickly address with the arguments I've seen around this is the Age of Sigmar fans. So, okay, if you're someone that likes to... I don't mean this in like a derogatory term, but if you're someone that likes to protect Games Workshop from criticism, I will say two things. Maybe three things. Number one, Games Workshop are big boys. They've been around a long time. They've done a lot of really shitty stuff. They've done a lot of really cool stuff, and they have been hated through all of it. They can take care of themselves. You don't need to defend them. Second of all is that if you are somebody that's been like just ripping on the old guard, who have been like bitching about how this is high fantasy, blah, 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 at least try and make your argument like consistent. One of the things that actually made me super annoyed was I've been seeing like full threads of people arguing about this, and the Age of Sigmar people will come out and be like, "Oh man, you think Warhammer is low fantasy?" And then they'll post pictures from like 3rd edition or 5th edition, which back then everything was like super bright and just super over the top. Like the hats were massive, and like the characters were super stupid looking. The lizardmen looked like idiotic, and everything was just completely out of control, just dumb, in my opinion. I really hate old fantasy. To me, it just looks really gaudy and really awful, and it's childish, and I hate it. Which gets into so don't do that, because you're shooting yourself in the foot and you're weakening your own argument. If you're trying to be like, no, this is acceptable within Warhammer Fantasy, focus on where Warhammer Fantasy ended on 6th, 7th, and 8th edition, which are the kind of when the finalized version of Warhammer Fantasy was established. Don't focus on the prior editions when Nagash looked like a goofy Halloween skeleton and all of the elves wore hats that had like entire eagles worth of feathers sticking out of them, and the dwarves were only like 3 feet tall, and just their beards were like 8 feet long, and like everything just looked really goofy. I really found that so bothersome to me. People trying to argue that Warhammer Fantasy is high fantasy, just because a lot of the really, really ancient editions just had like bizarre bullshit. Because the thing that I like about Warhammer Fantasy is that it's grounded. It has rules. It has really, really established nations, and it's realistic with just like a kiss of fantastical, which gets really ugly a lot of the time. But the third thing is that it's okay for people not to like something. If you are out there, and I'm not going to name names, but there are people who I know for a fact are in this community and I've seen some of the arguments and stuff. It is okay not to like something. Not everybody has to be super excited about every release, or gung-ho about every decision Games Workshop makes, or has to love everything about every product that comes out. It is totally acceptable for people to have their own opinions and to hate something or dislike something and to say that. You don't need to fight them. You don't need to defend Games Workshop. Games Workshop is a big boy. It's a company, not a person. It can defend itself, and it needs to be able to handle criticism. Don't be a warrior for Games Workshop. It doesn't care about you. If people have issues with releases and stuff, that's fine. Like, just make your voice heard on, hey, I like this thing, here's why I like it. You don't need to get into these absurd arguments that just makes the entire community look bad, in my opinion. Like, I have seen some just stupid shit the last week. I was gonna make a video about this probably the day after, and then I started reading people's things, and both sides were making me sick to my stomach, or cringe to my stomach, just because it was obnoxious as fuck. So, anyway, I've been talking way too long about this. I was hoping this would be 10 minutes, and I've been talking for almost 30 minutes. And the last thing I'll say, for those of you who've made it all the way through the video, which I appreciate it, is that I do feel very, very strongly that this basically guarantees that we're going to see Kislev in Warhammer 3. I do not believe the timing of this announcement is a coincidence. I believe that 100%, with no doubt, that this basically confirms that Games Workshop is going to give the okay for for Creative Assembly to have a full Kislevite faction. I don't know if Kislev will be at launch. They might be a DLC faction, but they're 100% going to be in the game, because why wouldn't they? Games Workshop is going to want to sell models, and if the faction you can play in the video game is a faction that is available to buy, then people who really like that faction in the game are going to really want to buy the models and play them on tabletop. That is like one of the strongest relationships between Total War Warhammer and Games Workshop that hasn't been available because they killed off Fantasy right before the game came out. Is that if all of the Warhammer Fantasy factions from Total War Warhammer get made back into being tabletop armies, people are going to flock to their favorite army, and it's going to be super awesome. So I am honestly expecting that we'll probably get a Vampire Coast announcement from Games Workshop at some point. And you know, those factions that we've seen in Total War Warhammer that existed in Warhammer lore, but were not playable on tabletop, at least in a reasonable fashion. So that's going to do it for this video. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Please let me know what you think of the Kislev reveal and announcement down below. Let me know if you'd really like to see the Norse and dwarves be their own thing. And let me know if you're excited for how they're going to completely redevelop Kislev and where they might go with it, and what your thoughts would be on seeing them in Total War Warhammer 3. So thanks so much for watching. See you guys next time.